At Thanksgiving, when the lights were dimmed just enough to make the atmosphere feel warmer than the people in it, my father stood at the head of the table like he was about to announce a presidential order. The turkey hadn't been carved, the candles were barely flickering, and everyone was pretending to be grateful for things none of us truly felt. Then he cleared his throat, lifted his glass, and said, "I'm selling the family business, and none of you will receive anything." Ethan actually cheered, like he'd been waiting for a punchline that finally made sense. Ava raised her phone like she was recording premium content for her followers. I didn't flinch. I simply pressed my napkin smooth against my lap and asked, "Interesting timing, Dad. Who's the buyer?" He smiled at me with that same smug tilt he'd used my entire life, as if I were a child interrupting an adult conversation. But that was the moment he had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. My name is Lena Cross, and for most of my life, I was the quiet outline in a family that adored the sound of its own myth. If you had walked into our home in Seattle, a sprawling craftsman-style house with manicured hedges and a view of Lake Washington, you would have seen photos of my siblings everywhere. Ethan posing with awards he didn't earn, but convinced everyone he deserved. Ava twirling on stages she rarely rehearsed for, her smile always angled for the camera rather than the audience. And somewhere, usually near the hallway thermostat or half hidden behind a taller cousin, a picture of me. That was the rhythm of the Cross family. Whoever shined the least faded the fastest. My father, Richard Cross, built our family software company the same way he ruled our home, with volume, certainty, and a relentless belief that he was always right. To him, legacy meant a bloodline of men taking over the company. Women, in his view, were supporting characters, decorative, dutiful, peripheral. When I got accepted into one of the top tech programs on the West Coast, he called it cute. When Ethan slept his way through half his classes but talked loudly about potential, Dad nodded proudly, insisting he'll grow into greatness. Mom, Mary Ann, drifted around the edges of every argument with a soft apology and a glass of wine, smoothing conflict instead of confronting it. She had been raised to preserve harmony at any cost, even when that cost was her children. So whenever Dad dismissed me, she would press my hand under the table but say nothing out loud. That silence shaped me more than any insult ever could. The turning point arrived when I was 23. I had spent months designing a new integration framework, something the company desperately needed to remain competitive. I studied every flaw in the system, every patch they'd ignored, every opportunity Dad was too arrogant to consider. I rehearsed my presentation for days, but 10 minutes into the boardroom meeting, in front of executives twice his age and far more accomplished, Dad laughed. Actually laughed. "This is theoretical nonsense," he said dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. The humiliation scorched me so deeply that my legs trembled under the table. I walked out knowing the company would never belong to me because it had never been allowed to. So I left Seattle without ceremony. No goodbye dinner, no dramatic exit. Just a one-way flight to Austin, a small studio apartment, ramen dinners, lukewarm coffee, and 70-hour work weeks where nobody cared what my last name was. And for the first time, anonymity felt like oxygen. I built my first product alone, my second with the remote team of freelancers. The third attracted investors who didn't care about my family. They cared about my vision. Over the years, the empire I constructed quietly and methodically became the kind of entity my father's company would dream of partnering with and eventually beg for. Yet every Thanksgiving, when I returned home out of obligation or nostalgia, the dynamics never shifted. Ethan bragged about handling big accounts even though he barely handled waking up on time. Ava live-streamed entire conversations, narrating her life like a personal brand documentary. Dad barely looked at me unless he needed to aim a backhanded compliment in my direction. But this year felt different the moment I walked through the door. Ethan was unusually smug, lounging with the arrogance of someone convinced they'd won a prize that they didn't know how to use. Ava lowered her phone for once and smirked at me like she knew a secret. Dad kept slipping into his study, whispering into the phone, voice lowered whenever footsteps neared. The whole house had a pulse, a hum of anticipation, as if everyone inside knew a storm was coming and they were waiting to see if I would break under it. One evening, I walked past Dad's study on my way to the kitchen. The door was open just a sliver, enough for his voice to drift out. "Yes, the offer stands, $50 million. We sign after the holiday. A pause. No, my children won't be involved. It's better they don't know. 50 million. A secret sale? No involvement? My fingers tightened around the staircase railing. He wasn't just selling the business. He was erasing us. Or rather, erasing me, because Ethan and Ava had already been informed. That wasn't oversight. That was precision. The same precision he'd honed my entire life. I leaned closer. Yes, Arcadia Systems, he said. They're eager. We'll close immediately after Thanksgiving. Arcadia Systems. My heart didn't race. It steadied, cold, focused. Arcadia Systems was my company, my empire, my mask. I didn't react outwardly. I stepped away before he sensed me. The calm that washed over me wasn't relief. It was realization. Everything was exactly where I needed it to be. In the kitchen, Dolores was chopping herbs, humming her usual soft tune. She glanced up. "You all right, Miss Lena?" she asked kindly. And for the first time in years, I smiled without forcing it. "I'm perfect," I said. Later that night, I joined the family by the fireplace. Ethan sprawled across the couch, recounting some fabricated client victory. Ava positioned herself under the best lighting, narrating her life like a personal brand documentary. Dad barely looked at me unless he needed to aim a backhanded compliment in my direction. "Still doing your little tech thing?" Ethan asked, smirking. "Your consulting hobby?" I tilted my head. "And how's the company's third quarter spending going?" His face twitched. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, nothing," I said lightly. "Just curious how tightly you're managing those payments." His face blanched a shade, and I knew he knew. Tomorrow, Dad would announce his big secret, and tomorrow I would announce mine. He stiffened, the color draining from his face as if the room had stolen it, because he knew and I knew. 300,000 missing over 3 years, hidden beneath fabricated vendor invoices and bills stamped urgent. He had no idea who was responsible, but I did. Ava, sensing the tension, lifted her phone. "Should I go live? People love family drama." "No," Dad barked without looking up, but the fuse was already lit. I sat back and let the quiet stretch like a taut wire. Tomorrow, when he announced his big secret, I would announce mine. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of Pacific Northwest light that softened edges and made the house look kinder than its inhabitants. Downstairs, the kitchen hummed, pots clattering, Dolores directing, the smell of lemon and sage more oppressive than comforting. Place cards sat at the table, a taxonomy of the family's priorities. Dad at the head, Ethan to his right, Ava to his left, Mom opposite with her hands folded like a peace offering, and me tucked in a corner like an afterthought. I didn't mind corners. Corners let you see everything. Dad barely looked my way when I passed. He was thumbing through documents, my documents, neatly printed and clipped into a folder he didn't realize a legal team had assembled. His confidence had a tenderness to it, like a man polishing the very chains he didn't yet feel. "Busy morning?" I said lightly. "Important business," he replied. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with." I let the condescension slide off of me. It no longer cut. It confirmed what had to happen. Mom drifted around the table, smoothing napkins and glancing at me with the flicker of an apology she couldn't voice. Guests arrived, the cousins, a few of Dad's old advisors, voices making the house feel like a theater buzzing before the curtain. Their small talk reinforced the story they'd all agreed upon for decades. Richard Cross, the brilliant patriarch, Ethan, the heir apparent, Ava, the socialite, Marianne, the gracious wife, and Lena, the quiet one. Invisible people are the best architects of change, I thought. Dinner began with the prescribed stiffness. Mom insisted we go around sharing gratitude. Ethan bragged about a massive client win. Ava thanked her followers. Dad praised the legacy he'd built. I said nothing. Gratitude could wait. The tension snapped when dessert arrived and Dad tapped his glass. The sound split the air. He rose with that familiar posture he used when he was about to perform leadership rather than practice it. "I've made a decision," he announced, voice filling the room. "One that secures the family name." He paused for effect. "I'm selling the company." Gasps fluttered like cloth. Richard's fork clattered. Ava's phone shot up. "To who?" Ethan sputtered. Pride swelling, Dad lifted his chin. "A firm called Arcadia Solutions is buying it. 50 million. Finalized tomorrow. None of you will receive shares. You'll forge your own paths. Ava's mouth fell open. Ethan's face ringed between fury and delight. Mom stared at her plate like it might swallow her alive. All eyes slid to me because I was the only one smiling. He thought he'd made the future safe for his legacy. He didn't realize he was handing it to me. The room did not go quiet all at once. Silence collapsed in waves. An intake from Ava, a scraping of a chair from Ethan, the embarrassed cough of an advisor. The chandelier above us thrummed like the house itself was holding its breath. Dad mistook the shock for admiration. He always did. This decision ensures our legacy, he declared, chest puffed. Arcadia Solutions recognize the value we built. I let a soft breath escape, a half laugh that tasted of relief and steel. Interesting, I said, because I am Arcadia Solutions. Actual silence landed like a physical thing. Even Ava forgot to film. Dad blinked first like he was waiting for the punchline he couldn't find. What? He said. What do you mean? I am Arcadia Solutions, I repeated calmly. The founder, the majority stakeholder, the signature on tomorrow's contract. Confusion split into shock, then disbelief, then a flare of anger. That's impossible, he snapped. Arcadia is run by Marion Stone. She's a tech investor. Stone, I corrected gently. Short for Lena Emerson Stone, the legal name I used for a decade of boardrooms, acquisitions, and investment decks. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a matte black business card, simple, embossed lettering, unmistakable. His hand trembled as he took it. This is absurd, he whispered. This can't be. It is, I said. When I left Seattle, I didn't fail. I built. I founded a company, scaled it, acquired others, expanded into enterprise tech. I studied your quarterly filings, your vendor landscape, your spending patterns, and positioned Arcadia to be the ideal buyer. One of his advisors coughed. Another stared like I'd rewritten gravity. Ethan exploded from his seat. You manipulated us. You plotted against your family. I turned to him, cool and clinical. Everything I used was public. Market data, vendor records, client histories, and your spending. The color seeped out of his face. Dad looked from Ethan to me, the dawning horror like frost settling over his features. What spending? He asked weakly. And there it was. Very calmly, I said, Ethan has been routing payments to fabricated vendors over the last 3 years, around $300,000. Dolores froze at the kitchen doorway, tray clutched to her chest. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Ava whispered, oh my God, the live stream moment she always wanted, finally arriving without filters. That's a lie, he roared. You're making this up to cover something. I laid a tablet on the table and opened a folder. Time-stamped entries, transfers to offshore accounts, IP logs tied to his login, email chains with vendor names that went to shell addresses. His jaw clenched until his teeth clicked. Dad slid slowly down into his chair as disbelief rolled across his face like a slow-moving wave. My own son embezzled from my company. No, I corrected. From my company as of the board vote. Legally, the transfer of ownership was complete. He looked at me as if the floor had fallen away. This isn't revenge, he whispered, as if the words still had the right to shape the world. No, I said softly, revenge would have been destroying you publicly 10 years ago. This is reclamation. The chandelier buzzed, a clink of chairs. The air felt cut, every edge sharp. Mom finally spoke, voice trembling. Lena, how long have you... Since the boardroom meeting when he called my ideas childish, since he cut me off mid-sentence, since the day I realized I'd never grow in the shadow he kept casting. Dad swallowed like the sound filled the room. And you're taking everything from me, he said, the sentence refusing to sound like accusation and instead landing as grief. I knelt so I could be eye level with him because even in those moments, the person who built something deserves to be treated with dignity. No, I told him, I'm giving you a way out. You built something valuable. You expanded what your father started, but the industry moved forward and you refused to move with it. The sale protects the company, the employees, the legacy. I'm not destroying it. I'm saving it. Ethan scoffed. You want to run it alone? Good luck. I'm not running it alone. I have a full executive team, operations, finance, innovation. Ava's mascara had streaked a little and her voice was small. What happens to us? She asked. I softened my tone only because she had been a child in that house and still deserved a steady answer. There's a role if you want one: communications, brand strategy, real responsibility, not content. She nodded slowly as the idea landed, stunned. Ethan's voice cracked when he pushed. And me? I met him without flinching. You'll repay the funds. You'll step down from a decision-making role. If you want a future here, you'll go back to school, study properly, earn it. Shame and rage split his expression. Dad's voice came out almost as a whisper. And me? I said Chairman Emeritus, a respected advisor, but not the decision maker. A symbolic role for the man who built the foundation, but can't lead its future. He closed his eyes. There was no triumph in my face, no gloating. I stood and let silence breathe between us. Then he looked up at me with something I had chased my whole life, but never expected to receive. You outgrew us, he said, not as reproach, but as admission. No, I answered. I simply stopped shrinking. The house stayed frozen for a long moment before the ambient noise of life seeped back in. The vents hum, a clink of dishes, a muted sob from Ava. It was done. Not revenge. Restoration. By 8 that morning, the acquisition announcement went live, and my phone lit up with messages from my executive team, industry reporters, and clients congratulating Arcadia on its expansion. From downstairs, I heard Dad's study door open and close. A different sound now, not the slam of command, but the tiny thud of a man adjusting to a world he no longer controlled. Ethan left early, avoiding eye contact, pausing only to stare into the foyer mirror as if he didn't recognize the person who looked back. He would repay what he took. He would rebuild if he chose to. Ava found me in the kitchen later, her voice small and real. Did you mean it about the role? Yes, I told her, but it starts with responsibility, not followers. She wiped leftover mascara from under her eyes and nodded. Mom came over quieter than usual, touching my arm. Your father is proud, she said, even if he can't say it. And so am I, she added. By afternoon, Dad emerged from his study without a folder or a lecture, just a hesitant step toward his daughter. I'll take the advisory position, he said, voice careful, if you still want me there. I nodded. It's where you belong, just not where you used to be. For the first time, we stood closer to equals. 6 months later, I walked through the renovated lobby of what was now Heart Arcadia Technologies. Light poured through new glass walls, and the company finally reflected a future rather than clinging to a past. Dad's portrait still hung by his father's, unchanged, but next to them was a new frame, mine. Not as the forgotten middle child, not as the daughter who didn't fit, but as the woman who carried the company into its next chapter. Ethan checked in from his graduate program on the regular, humbled but working. Ava had become an unexpectedly effective communications lead, trading vanity for strategy. Mom volunteered with organizations supporting young women in tech, determined not to repeat the silence that had shaped her. As for me, I felt finally like the life I'd built without asking anyone's permission was mine to inhabit. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have seen you most clearly, I hope my story reminds you your value isn't theirs to decide. If this resonated, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with friends, and comment with your perspective or the key lessons you took from this story.